cause I'm on one.
You know, we have ones that's a Rastafari, live in the city, Kingston City, Manhattan, like you know, we live amongst our universal brothers and sisters, and Rastafari is for each and every one. So it's not a...
Swinging for the fences for the home run.
Habesha, Begusana, guess the Ethiopia. Habesha, Mr. Shomaya, the Farambasa. Habesha.
Even further beyond into the universe, but I've got to make it to first.
Urgent message from the 12 seers of Mount Zion. They said the black nation will be blessed by God in these days. Circle the mountain and go home. Shabbat, Mount Zion calling me.
And now, interestingly enough, for those who may have had their own reservations and thinking that this day may have never even come, but yet and still here we are. And more so pulling this from the Wall Street Journal for those who would like to do a little bit more research for themselves. But, again, just picking up where we left off on a lot of these discussions and just making sure we have something coherent for ones to follow as far as the storyline and the pinpoints. Even though we know now, even from following a lot of this story, we see that many developments have happened and are happening right now as we speak. But here, again, just catching ones up. The U.S. and the Taliban reach agreement that could precede peace deal. Subtitled here, deal is a further milestone toward ending a war that has endured for more than 18 years. The writers here are Courtney McBride, a writer out of Muscat, Oman, and also Dion Nissenbaum in Beirut, Lebanon, along with Sun-Allah Amiri, who's also in Kabul, Afghanistan. This report, February 21st, 2020, and reads on as such. The U.S. and Afghan Taliban are preparing to sign a historic peace deal next week meant to end America's longest war if the two sides succeed in reducing violence in Afghanistan over the next 7 days. After months of on-again, off-again talks, the U.S. and Taliban agreed to curtail most attacks across Afghanistan in a deal that took effect after midnight on Saturday in the country, starting a week-long clock that is supposed to end with a permanent peace deal. And if the effort succeeds, and the two sides sign the deal next weekend, the Afghan government plans to launch its own direct talks with the Taliban to forge a difficult agreement to bring the militants into the government and end fighting. More than 110,000 Afghans or Afghanis have been killed since 2001, when the Taliban government was toppled by the U.S. The tenuous U.S.-Taliban agreement faces serious hurdles, and there are widespread fears that any momentum could be reversed by uncompromising militants looking to derail the plans by triggering deadly attacks over the next week. Last September, President Trump abruptly called off talks with the Taliban and canceled a planned peace summit at Camp David outside Washington after the militants claimed responsibility for an attack that killed an American soldier in Afghanistan. But all sides involved in the conflict hailed the agreement as a momentous step that offers Afghanistan its best chance to end the war. Our brave security and defense forces will only act in defense of themselves and the honorable people of Afghanistan, quote unquote. President Ashraf Ghani said Friday night, hours before the deal took hold. The Taliban issued a public statement directing all its fighters to keep out of enemy territory and shoot only in self-defense. The new deal stops short of a full ceasefire. The U.S., which has about 13,000 troops in Afghanistan, said it would continue to carry out operations against small numbers of Islamic State and al-Qaeda fighters operating in the country. Complicating the arrangement, conflicts in many parts of Afghanistan are fueled by local disputes, tribal and ethnic rivalries, and the factions involved may be only loosely affiliated with the Taliban group. U.S. military officials are expected to monitor the security environment, making use of intelligence resources to determine responsibility for any acts of violence that occurred during the period. But if violence in Afghanistan significantly subsides, the U.S. and Taliban negotiators will meet in Doha, Qatar, to sign the pact or the peace plan meant to end the war President George W. Bush started to topple the Taliban government, which provided sanctuary to al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden as he planned the September 11, 2001 attacks. It remains unclear how the U.S. will measure success that paves the way for a long-term deal. The deal will allow for a broader political statement to end the war in Afghanistan, reduce United States and allied forces' presence, and ensure that no terrorist group ever uses Afghan soil to threaten the United States or our allies, quote-unquote, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said in a statement. A senior State Department official said Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad, the U.S. Special Envoy for Afghanistan, would sign the agreement on behalf of the U.S. At the peak of the war in 2010, the U.S. had 100,000 troops in Afghanistan. The U.S. is preparing to keep nearly 9,000 troops in the country to carry out counterterrorism operations. A key Taliban demand is for all U.S. troops to leave Afghanistan, which has complicated negotiations for years. A degree of trust has been built through our talks with the American negotiators in Doha, Qatar. But just as the United States does not trust us completely, we too are very far from fully trusting it. Surajuddin Haqqani, deputy leader of the Taliban, wrote in an opinion piece published Thursday by the New York Times. The peace process could come under threat from domestic political developments in Afghanistan. The country's election commission earlier this week confirmed Mr. Ghani had won a second term in office 5 months after the September election, but opposition politicians are challenging the victory, and the Taliban warned that the announcement was at odds with the peace process. The Taliban so far has refused to recognize as legitimate any Afghan government supported by the U.S., dismissing them as lackeys of Washington. The coming talks will test how far the Taliban have come in shedding those views. The stakes involved in the process are immense, as the potential for the country to slide back into violence remains high. The United Nations counted a record 8,200 civilian casualties, including 2,563 deaths in the first 9 months of 2019. In the last 3 months of 2019, attacks by the Taliban and other armed anti-government groups hit a 10-year high, according to the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, an independent U.S. government watchdog agency. 23 U.S. soldiers were killed in Afghanistan last year, the most since the international combat mission wound down in 2014. Taliban spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid said both parties now will create a suitable security situation ahead of signing a final accord in the presence of international observers on February 29, 2020. We hope this will lead to a ceasefire and intra-Afghan talks, said Javid Faisal, the spokesperson for Afghanistan's National Security Council. North Atlantic Treaty Organization Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg welcomed Friday's announcement. This could pave the way for negotiations among Afghans or Afghanis, sustainable peace, and ensuring the country is never again a safe haven for terrorists, he said.